when we lose power like this, like people can die, right? And so it's just so important that, you know, as we're thinking about preparing for extreme events that can cause blackouts or like anything that could cause a big blackout, that we think not just about reducing the risk to the grid, but also kind of on that back end, ensuring that these very critical services, those life-saving services, can continue to run. My name is Seth Blumsack. I'm a professor of energy policy and economics and international affairs at Penn State and co-director of Penn State's Center for Energy Law and Policy. So what happened in Spain and Portugal was a massive, massive blackout, right? You had most of the Spanish power grid go down within about 5 seconds in the middle of the day, right? And then that cascaded over into Portugal's power grid. So we know what happened. What we don't know, or at least not yet, is a really definitive explanation of why it happened. And with a blackout that is as big as this one and happened as fast as this one, I think it's a pretty safe bet that you had multiple factors at play here, and this wasn't just kind of one isolated event or an isolated root cause. So people are going to look at lots of data, right, from the power grid, and try to figure out what happened, what the cause of this was, and then from there, once you figure out what the cause was, then you get into the kind of like the important but sometimes very tricky questions of how do you reduce the risk of something like this happening in the future. It's pretty astounding, actually, to think about just how much of our life is dependent on reliable electricity. And it's sort of one of those things like you almost don't notice it until it goes away, right? Aside from kind of things that we sort of immediately see, like things like lights turning on, our computers running, our appliances working, right? There's just all sorts of like infrastructure and critical services that rely on the power grid. So the communication systems, right, that allow us to use our cell phones and the internet, those all rely on electricity. Hospitals, emergency responders, police, right, kind of all of their systems use electricity. We absolutely could experience a blackout like this one in the United States. And since we don't know the cause of the blackout that happened in Spain and Portugal, it's difficult to say whether the exact same factors that caused that blackout could cause a similar blackout here. But we have had really big blackouts. The power grid is one of the most complex things that mankind has ever engineered, right? Its complexity is really right up there with kind of, space travel or anything like that. So the power grid is this giant network of power plants and wires and substations and all sorts of stuff that plugs into that network, right? And so you're talking about, thousands of power plants, tens or hundreds of thousands of miles of transmission lines, right? Thousands of substations, right? For a power grid that is kind of like as big as the one that we have in the United States, or that you would find in kind of, Europe or, some place like that. Even though, the grid is this giant network that has all of this redundancy, right? When you can't match supply and demand, right, it's a little like pushing that first domino over in a line of dominoes, right? And, not being able to match supply and demand in one little pocket of the grid can very easily send these effects cascading over many states, or as Europe found out, many different countries, right? And so small problems can cascade into really big problems really quickly.
Jelajahi cara baru mendapatkan informasi. Download MetroTV Extend sekarang.